Step 3 in the Pathways assessment process is to assess the student work you selected in Step 2. As a reminder, we are going to go to the Pathways website, click on Assessment, and then scroll down to Step 3. Once your students have completed the work that you assigned, you will apply the relevant Pathways rubrics to determine student competency on each Pathways student learning outcome addressed in the course. And there's a link right in Step 3 where you can access the Pathways rubrics. Pathways instructors will rate students as below competent, competent, or above competent. Depending on the student work that is selected, instructors may choose to use a Pathways rubric as is to assess student performance, or the instructor may interpret a Pathways rubric to determine the extent to which a student has gained the knowledge, skill, or ability articulated in a specific Pathways student learning outcome. I will show you examples of how an instructor might use the Pathways rubrics as written or interpret the Pathways rubrics in a minute. One common question regarding Pathways assessment is which students need to be assessed. If you are teaching a course with 20 students or less, you will need to assess each student in your Pathways course. If you are teaching a larger course or courses, you may choose to collect assessment data for a minimum sample of 20 randomly selected students per course section. If you are teaching multiple sections of the same course, you will still need to report data for at least 20 students per course section. So if you are teaching 2 sections of the same course, you will need to submit data for at least 40 students rather than 20 students. The larger the sample size, the more reliable and valid any conclusions from the data you collect will be. Therefore, we encourage Pathways instructors to submit data for as many students as possible. If you are using data from OpScan forms or from Canvas, it may be easier to submit data for all of the students in your course rather than report data for a sample of students. If you choose to utilize sampling for your Pathways course, all students in the course should complete the same assignments, but only the work of the sampled students would need to be reviewed and reported. More detailed information on sampling is provided in the Assessment Sampling FAQs handout located in the General Resources sidebar. This handout includes sample size suggestions for large courses and an alternative sampling method for large multi-section courses. For Step 3, we are mostly concerned with the assessment criteria column in the Pathways assessment reporting form, which we'll go back to now, and that's also located in the General Resources sidebar. Okay, going back to the Ethical Reasoning tab, we see in the Assessment Criteria column 2 examples of how an instructor has used the Pathways Ethical Reasoning rubric as is to assess student performance as below competent, competent, or above competent. If we open the Reasoning and the Natural Sciences tab, we see 3 examples of how an instructor has interpreted the Pathways Reasoning and the Natural Sciences rubric to assess student performance. For example, for Student Learning Outcome 1, the instructor has determined student competency levels based on the number of multiple choice items that a student answered correctly on the final exam. Using a set of 9 multiple choice items for Student Learning Outcome 1, the instructor rated students as below competent if they correctly answered 5 or fewer of the 9 multiple choice items aligned with this outcome. They rated students as competent if they correctly answered 6 or 7 of the 9 items, and above competent if they correctly answered 8 or 9 items. For the 2 short answer questions assessed for Student Learning Outcome 3, the instructor rated students as below competent if they scored 6 or fewer of the 10 total points assigned to the 2 short answer questions. Competent if they scored 7 or 8 of the 10 total points. And above competent if they scored 9 or 10 of the 10 total points. Once you have assessed student performance as below competent, competent, and above competent for each of the Pathways student learning outcomes addressed in your course, Step 3 is complete.